How's it going? Welcome back to Dylan Pickups blog. So I'm coming at you from Orlando, Florida today. We are down here to do some meet with some people about some amps and some guitars and some pickups, so that's pretty cool. We're doing some sales for Fuchs Audio Technologies for their amps and pedals, so that's pretty cool. And we're doing some talking to some people about some guitars and of course my pickup line down here in Orlando. This morning I'm actually just at the pool at the hotel. You got to make some fun out of it too as well, right? So that's why we're here. But we want to talk, we want to go ahead and still do our blog post even though we're on the road. We got a question over the weekend I thought was a really good one, talking about fancy power cables. You know, you can get the ones that are like a little bit thicker than a normal factory one. You get the big ones that are like a bunch of wires braided together, and a lot of people are like, well, does that kind of stuff make a difference in my tone? This is one of those kind of subjective questions. There are some technical aspects of it that do make a difference that you want to watch for, but some of it can be a bit subjective because there's a lot of little factors in it. Let's talk briefly about what your power cable does. It sounds like a stupid thing to say, but when we're going, basically we're just taking our power from our house to our amp, or from, you know, the gig, whatever, to our amp. The funny thing about electricity is, and really in anything, you know, electricity in any kind of fashion, is that it's only as good as its weakest link. So, if you have a bad path for it anywhere along the way, it doesn't matter how good everything else is, it's not going to be good. It's just not going to be. But to understand why that's even important in a guitar amp, you need to think about where the electricity goes after it goes through the power cable. So it comes out of the wall, goes through the power cable, and it usually looks like, well, actually I don't even have one right here, but I just took the one off of my laptop. So this end is a little bit different, but you know what I'm talking about. It's the normal amp cable, they all look the same, right? And this one is a flat one, but usually they're the round black ones, you know, grounded. You know, for any modern kind of amp. Okay, so where does it go after that? It goes straight into the amp, and basically the first stop it makes is the input transformer. Okay, and basically what an input transformer is it's got the wires coming in from the wall, and it's got a coil, and it's got 120 volts from the wall in for the United States stuff. Okay, into the wall, or out from the wall into the amp. On the other side of that transformer, it has the output voltages to your amp. Now, depending on the amp, let's just pull some numbers out of the air based on common stuff. So let's say 300 volts is on one of those output coils. Either 5 volts or 6.3 volts is on another one for, say, your rectifier. Okay. There's usually like 3 output voltages on the other side. So where those go after that is probably why the power from the wall is important. The consistency of those voltages is key to making everything work. Because on the other end of the amp, we're loading it. When we play the guitar, we're creating a load, and it's varying voltage and things are moving around. Remember, I usually say that sine wave that I write on my whiteboard isn't at all what our sound looks like. We're loading and unloading and loading and unloading. And we are, you know, we're pulling different current and voltages. Things are moving around all the time. But one of the most consistent ones that really there's a couple that really need to happen consistently, is obviously that high voltage, the plate voltage, and the other one is our rectifier voltage that turns the AC from the wall into DC to run everything in the amp. That stuff needs to stay at a consistent voltage to work right. And at some point in there, it becomes our audio signal. And if that voltage is moving around a lot, or remember that current, voltage, and resistance are all proportions of each other. So if the force of the electricity coming from the wall varies, then if it's varying, then your voltages and everything are varying on this side, okay? So that's really what we're concerned with when we talk about power cords, the ability of the power cord to be able to supply, because the voltage is going to stay relatively constant as most houses are, although that's terrible too. But so let's just say, for all intents and purposes, that you're getting a consistent 120 volts from your house, which you're probably not, but let's just say for our discussion that you are. You're getting 120 volts. But the force of that, calling it the current, is based on the load on the other end. So how we load our amp while we're playing it is moving up and down. So how much current we need of that 120 volts, how much push, is constantly moving. The ability for the power cord to be able to get the power from the wall to the amp, to be able to supply all of that, needs to be good. If it's your weakest link, it can make a difference in the amp's ability to maintain the voltages at their tolerances that they're supposed to be. The rectifier voltage is the first one that comes to mind, that you can really notice some stuff. And if it can't, then theoretically you could hear it in your tone. Now so yes, there is science to the fact that your power cable does make a difference. Now, can you hear the difference? This is a very subjective thing. In my audiophile side, you know, with all my super home theater stuff and all that, it seems to be the more you spend for stuff, and the higher, the more finicky it gets, because the higher tolerances everything are, the more something like this makes a difference. You can tell a difference on real high-end audio stuff in certain situations. Does this mean that you're going to tell a difference with your guitar amp at a bar on Saturday night? And you know, it's going to be up to you. But here's a couple of things I want you to think about. The wire in your wall is usually 14 gauge. The wire on, let's say, a computer monitor, now this one right here, now here's a law. Let me just give you something helpful. A law says that every power cable has to have embossed on it somewhere the gauge of the wire, so you can immediately tell how much current, you know, what this thing can handle. This one right here is embossed with 18 AWG, which means this is 18 gauge wire. The wire in your wall is 14 gauge, okay? So some of these companies that make these cool power amp cables make 14 gauge power amp cables. So now you don't at all have a weak link between the power in your wall and your amp, or at least to your output transformer. That's really where it's the most important. So that being said, does it make a difference? It can in certain circumstances. In studios, when all your tolerances are super tight and you can, I mean, with headphones you can sit there and you can hear everything, it can make a difference in how much hum there is. It could make a difference. Playing in a bar on Saturday night, I'm not sure. Now, your amp doesn't make a difference. It depends on the amp, because let's just say, what are the tolerances in your amp? Do you even know? Is it gonna make a difference without you trying it? Okay. The other thing too is, when I was asked this question, I immediately called my friend Andy Fuchs at Fuchs Audio Technologies, and just said, hey, what's your thoughts on this power cable thing? Because, you know, it's a question that's come up a lot and I need to answer it. And he said, man, it's super subjective, but here's what I'm going to tell you. On all the amps that we build, we make sure that the power cable is good enough from the factory, what you get sent with the amp, to work with the amp, you know, based on the wattage of it. So if it's a 4-watt amp all the way up to a 150-watt amp, they're going to make sure that the power cable that comes with it is good enough in the first place, and you don't really need to worry about it. So, that being said, depending on the quality of your amp that you have, you might not even have to worry about it, because it's probably already good. If it's something just off the shelf, normal big name amp, go to that embossed thing on there, See if it's an 18 gauge or if it's a 14 gauge wire. And if you have an extra 20-30 bucks to try a different cable, try it. See if it makes a difference to you. If it doesn't make a difference, then you know. Because it's not going to make a difference for everybody. Based on the tolerances inside the amp, based on what it already comes with, based on your ear, and the tolerances of your music and how you play, are you going to be able to tell a difference in how clean, you know, less hum, or how tight the sound is because the rectifier tube can, or the solid state rectifier, depending on what you have, can keep up. All that stuff is all pretty subjective. So fortunately, some of these are not that expensive to try the good ones. But before you do that, go check the stamping on the cable that you have and see if it's a 16 gauge or an 18 gauge wire, or a 14 gauge. If it's a 14 gauge wire already, you know, maybe you don't need to do anything about it at all. It's just, like I said, it can be subjective based on the setup. Fortunately, it's not that expensive to try it. It's one of those things where the science is there to support it being better, making a difference. Are you going to know it? That's going to be up to you and the amp that you play. I hope this helps, and we'll probably do another video from here on Wednesday because I'm